My name is Emma. After dropping out of high school, I channeled all my energy into my work, driven by a decision I felt was essential for me. Although my parents were initially concerned, they supported my choice, and their backing has been instrumental in my achievements. Recently, my parents, whom I deeply appreciate, shared that they are contemplating selling our family home. This house, passed down from my grandparents, has been renovated over time but has begun to show its age. With my parents growing older, they're considering moving to a barrier-free apartment and demolishing our old family home. Recognizing the house's condition, I suggested that we move in together for a while. Although I might eventually get married and we may not be able to live together indefinitely, I wanted to give back to my parents who supported me during my unconventional path. So we moved into a new apartment. It's spacious with more rooms than our old house, and being on a high floor, my parents are thrilled with the view. We even have a hobby room now. One day, while enjoying this new chapter with my parents, I received a call from my younger sister, Jane. Our relationship has been strained for years. She's always been embarrassed by my decision to leave high school. When I dropped out, Jane was furious and said, "Why are you quitting high school, Emma? I don't want anyone to know my sister dropped out. Pretend we don't know each other from now on." Despite attending different high schools, Jane was ashamed of my decision. She's always been a high achiever, attending a more prestigious school, and has frequently looked down on me. Her favorite phrase was "Emma is stupid," and she often mocked me, saying, "There's no way you'll succeed. You don't even understand that because you're stupid." I was exhausted by her constant criticism and the belief that I was a burden to our parents, so I moved out as soon as I started earning from part-time jobs. Now, 10 years later, Jane has also moved out and there has been no communication between us. It seems she's been distant from our parents too, since she started living alone for college. When our parents decided to demolish our family home, they consulted both Jane and me. Jane's response was dismissive. "I don't care about that old house. Do whatever you want." My parents were left puzzled, wondering why Jane had become so indifferent. Then, out of the blue, Jane called. According to my mother, who answered the phone, Jane had gotten married without informing them at all. "So, you've decided to live in a condo, huh? Well, bring your husband over sometime and show us around," my mother said, revealing her surprise at Jane's marriage. Jane nonchalantly replied, "Didn't I mention it?" It also turned out that Jane hadn't planned a wedding ceremony, which seemed odd. Jane had always been the type to dream of being a princess and had even described in detail the kind of wedding dress she wanted. It was strange that someone so fixated on a grand wedding would skip it entirely. I wondered if her husband was lacking in funds, but Jane mentioned that he worked at the same prestigious company as she did, a well-known corporation with ample financial stability. This only added to the mystery. Finally, the day came when Jane visited our parents' house with her husband. "Wow, such a large and clean room. The view is amazing. Sorry for the intrusion," Jane's husband said as he stood by, while Jane, showing no hesitation, began exploring every room of her childhood home. Jane's husband, Scott, had a fresh-faced appearance and an expensive-looking watch on his wrist. Despite his polished look, he avoided making eye contact with us. After introducing himself to my parents, Scott began exploring the house with the same lack of restraint as Jane. "Your parents did really well. The station is close, and there's a shopping mall just around the corner. You've moved to a fantastic place," Scott commented. "Yeah, it's all thanks to Emma," my mother said with a smile. I modestly replied, "It wasn't a big deal." But Jane's response was deliberately cutting. "Really? You have an older sister? I didn't notice. I never imagined a place this beautiful and upscale would have an older sister living here." "Jane, Emma is not freeloading," my father interjected, but Jane dismissed him, pointing at me and calling Scott over. "Hey, Scott, can you believe this woman is my sister? This is Jane's sister you've been talking about." "I didn't realize because you two look nothing alike," Scott replied. I was stunned by the mockery from Jane and Scott. My mother chastised Jane. "What are you saying?" But Jane brushed it off. "My sister didn't even graduate high school. She's not exactly the brightest. There's a big difference between us, especially since we graduated from a state university," Jane said, as if revealing a great secret. Hearing this, I was taken aback. It made sense why Jane would be embarrassed if this was her family. Laughing together, Jane and Scott continued their tour of the house, even opening the door to my room. Jane looked around my room with a look of disgust and said, What's the point of hoarding all these comic books? It's creepy. Are you still into that nerdy stuff?" The walls of my room are lined with comic books because I'm a comic book artist. I dropped out of high school to devote myself fully to my work. Jane, who has always been dismissive of subcultures like mine, couldn't understand my passion, just as I can't fathom her heavy mascara. Well, I'm a comic book artist. These are my references, I explained. Oh, you're probably not even a successful comic book artist, are you? You're still mooching off mom and dad. It's disgraceful. Just get out, Jane said dismissively. Taken aback, I replied, what? Just get out. Scott and I are going to be living here from now on, Jane declared. What? Jane, I had no idea about this. My mother and father exclaimed in shock. Jane ignored their surprise, laughing derisively. Scott and I will take care of mom and dad. You're no longer needed here, so just leave. Aren't you embarrassed to still be depending on them? Not only are you ugly, but you're also stupid. As Jane spoke, Scott merely chuckled, clearly trying to contain his own irritation. I said, fine. Jane and Scott's attitude not only infuriated my parents but made me furious as well. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I reluctantly agreed to Jane's demand. All right, I'll move out in a few days and you and Scott can move in. But just so you know, I won't be giving you any money. Sure. Bye, sis. Please move out as soon as you can, Jane replied with a smirk. After making their demands, Jane and Scott left, triumphantly telling my parents, next time we come, it'll be to move in. My parents insisted, you don't need to move out, but I, now determined to get back at Jane and Scott, said, no, I'm moving out. I have somewhere else to go. I packed up and left promptly. Jane and Scott soon took over the family home. On the day I moved out, Jane called, have you moved out yet? I answered with frustration, I'm on my way out now, so don't worry. Jane always maintained a polite demeanor with our parents, never showing them any of her true feelings, but she often belittled me. To them, Jane and I were both cherished daughters. They told Jane and Scott that it hurt to hear them speak poorly of me, but it seemed the two of them ignored their comments. A month later, just as I had anticipated, Jane called. When I saw her name on the caller ID, I braced myself. Nearly in tears, Jane said, Emma, the property management company called and said they haven't received the rent. What's going on? They even said if I don't pay soon, they'll evict me. Why would I pay the rent? I don't live there anymore. I heard from mom and dad that you were covering the rent to show your gratitude to them, right? Why did you stop? Like I said, I don't live there, so I'm not responsible for the rent. Just get the money together now. The utility bills are also incredibly high. Annoyed by Jane's continued demands, I hung up and called my boyfriend, Liam. Jane just called and asked me to come over. I'm heading to her parents' house now. Okay, I'll come with you. I'm worried about you, Emma, and I haven't seen your parents in a while, Liam said. The reason I had a place to go right after leaving my parents' home was that Liam had offered me a room, as we were discussing the possibility of marriage. This past month had been a valuable period for us to adjust. When we arrived at my parents' house, Jane met us at the door, her face flushed with anger. Did you bring the money? You need to pay up to show some gratitude to our parents. Do you think I'm struggling to make ends meet as a cartoonist? How do you expect me to cover the rent for such an expensive apartment? I replied. Well, you managed to pay before, didn't you? Just cover the rent and utility bills, Jane insisted. I won't. Jane and Scott, you both have respectable jobs, right? Why can't you handle your own rent? I asked. Jane was momentarily speechless. I began to suspect that Jane and Scott might be financially strained. Jane was dressed in high-end brands from head to toe, and Scott sported a luxury watch and designer clothes. Could it be that Jane and Scott can't pay the rent rather than simply refusing to? You claimed you wanted to take care of mom and dad, but I've heard you've left all the housework to them. Aren't you and Scott just living off them? Jane, clearly caught off guard, bit her lip. Scott, who had been avoiding eye contact with me and focusing solely on Liam, finally spoke up with a shaky voice. Why is Liam here? Liam? I asked, feeling surprise. Jane looked puzzled and Liam, who had been watching the argument with concern, stepped forward with a friendly smile and introduced himself. Hello there. I see you're aware that I'm dating Emma with plans to marry her, Liam said smoothly. What? Emma and Liam are dating? Who the heck is this Liam guy? Jane exclaimed, clearly surprised. Scott, looking flustered, turned to Jane. Don't you know? He's a voice actor from a popular anime that everyone's been talking about. You must have seen him on TV. What? Why is my sister dating someone like that? It's because Emma is the creator of the original story for that influential anime, Liam explained. Jane's face went pale as the realization hit her. I had a series published in a boys' magazine, which had become a major cultural phenomenon. Even Jane, who wasn't familiar with comics, recognized the title and seemed to regret underestimating me now that she knew I was successful. Seeing Jane's sudden shift in attitude, I sighed and said, "If you can't pay, then leave right now. I'll be expecting the rent for this month from you later." "Don't say that. Scott and I got caught up in gambling and lost a lot of money," Jane admitted reluctantly. It turned out that Jane and Scott had become heavily involved in slot machines and had squandered a significant amount of their funds. Their decision to move in with our parents was driven by their financial troubles. They had even borrowed money from dubious sources, leaving most of their salaries to pay off the debt. I have no intention of helping Jane, especially given how she's always mocked me. Since our parents are moving again, you and Scott should leave immediately. Why are Mom and Dad moving? Are you trying to keep them from coming to their aid? I couldn't help but worry that Jane, burdened by debt, might cause problems for our parents. "If you don't leave promptly, I'll charge you for the second month's rent as well." Jane and Scott reluctantly agreed, and the meeting ended. Later, when my parents, who had been out, heard about the situation, they called Liam to apologize. Liam, however, remained calm. "It might be best to avoid Jane for a while," he suggested. "And we should find a new place for my parents to move to." I quickly bought a new apartment, and my parents prepared to relocate once more. "I'm sorry for the trouble," my parents said, and I responded, "It's only right to repay you for supporting me when I made the drastic decision to leave high school. I am where I am today because of you." My parents were moved to tears by my words. Jane and Scott continued to struggle with their debt, but I had no obligation to show mercy. I insisted on full payment for the rent and utilities I had covered. When they didn't respond to my calls, I contacted their workplace directly and eventually received the payment. This, however, led to their financial troubles becoming public knowledge at their company. Jane and Scott, unable to quit their jobs due to their financial situation, continued to work under uncomfortable circumstances. Afterwards, I married Liam. Our parents gave us their blessing, and we've been happily building our life together. Although I've cut ties with Jane and Scott, I still hope they manage to find their way and live strong.